Putin bad news. If Putin passes away, Varadkar believes Ireland is not likely to send condolences to Russia. The Taoiseach was asked to speculate on a situation that echoed a notorious diplomatic blunder from World War II. If Vladimir Putin were to pass away, the Irish government would not send condolences to Russia, according to Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. Mr. Varadkar was addressing a question about Irish diplomacy from the past. He expressed doubt that any representatives from Ireland would attend the funeral of the Russian president. The events depicted in the hypothetical happened about 8 decades ago. The Irish government maintained a firm stance of neutrality throughout World War II. After Adolf Hitler committed suicide in 1945, the Irish government's then Taoiseach and Minister for External Affairs, Eamon de Valera, caused international indignation by offering his condolences to the Irish Minister for Germany, Eduard Hempel. Damage to Mr. de Valera's and the state's reputation was substantial, and this episode is remembered as a watershed in the fight for Irish neutrality. This week, at a post-cabinet briefing with Mr. Varadkar, the diplomatic conundrum was pulled into the 21st century. Senior government ministers have stated that Ireland's insistence on maintaining its policy of neutrality refers to the country's military neutrality rather than its political neutrality. While meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv last week, Mr. Varadkar vowed to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. He also promised millions of euros in new aid money for Ukraine. After returning from his trip, the Taoiseach faced questions concerning Mr. de Valera's behavior after Hitler's assassination. Mr. Varadkar was asked by reporters if Ireland would extend a similar condolence to Russia upon Mr. Putin's death, and he responded, "I don't think so." He paused for a moment to examine the hypothetical situation before continuing, "It's a good question, I hadn't thought of it before." As Mr. Varadkar, who was barred from entering Russia last year, put it, "I wouldn't expect we'd be represented at the funeral." The Kremlin announced in November that it will be blacklisting 52 key representatives from Ireland for allegedly harboring Russophobic views. Russia imposed the embargo on a number of high-ranking officials, including Mr. Varadkar. "We have requested response from the Russian embassy in Dublin. The idea that the Kremlin lacks an ideology, while widely held, is false, according to historian Mikhail Suslov. It incorporates aspects from the left and right that are usually seen as at conflict, and its ideology is more well-developed than it might appear at first look. And while Putin talks about conservatism, his views reflect a utopian conservatism, with leftist elements designed to appeal to those opposed to Western liberalism, as argued by Suslov. Novaya-Gazeta.eu/articles/2023/07/22/Kreml-Kazhay-Stoby-Putinism-Style-Universal-Noy-Ideology closing While the vocabulary some use comes from the church. According to the historian, Putinism was created when the Russian elite needed a solution to a serious issue. The issue is what to do with Soviet history. A true conservative perspective in Russia would repudiate that revolutionary era, but, for the overwhelming majority of the political establishment in Russia, the Soviet past is an important anchor. The Kremlin looked for a solution that would unite Russians by incorporating Soviet history into a shared Russian past that would maintain identities but not political structures. For the top brass, the identity of the Russian people doesn't change, only the political structures of state changes. According to Suslov, this strategy has helped Putin and his supporters advocate for policies that seem diametrically opposed to their conservatism, such as leftist appeals to opponents of Western liberalism and globalism, which have helped Moscow recover its standing in the Third World and among those in the West who feel they have been sacrificed by liberal elites. He argues that these synergies demonstrate that the Russian world is not nearly as fundamental as is commonly believed. The idea of a unified and stable society is important. Putin's invasion of Ukraine can be understood in light of his view that anyone who question this are not enemies but traitors. Suslov maintains that Putinism has an established framework, which he uses to justify his policies at home and abroad. This political philosophy is founded on a rejection of liberal ideals of government, which is combined with a populist outlook and an identity-based conservatism, although not a systemic conservatism like in the West.